Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
Talking About Marketing is a podcast for business owners and leaders, produced by my dad, Steve Davis, and his colleague at Talked About Marketing, David Olney, in which they explore marketing through the lens of their own 4 Ps: person, principles, problems, and perspicacity. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apart from their love of words, they really love helping people. So they hope this podcast will become a trusted companion on your journey in business.
This episode of Talking About Marketing is entitled The Planning Fallacy. And David Olney, I thought I had everything planned and ready and things had to change at the last minute. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
That is definitely part of the planning fallacy, that we think things will go how we planned because we planned them. And we're capable, so surely our plan must hold together, which unfortunately is the first casualty of planning.
That does sound a lot like the first casualty of war.
The fog of war and the fog of planning are very similar, and people say that both are unique, and they're really not, because the characteristic thing is that in the silence of your office, with all your expertise in a specific discipline, it seems very natural to think that planning can go well first try. But most people's expertise is not planning, and most plans will not be implemented in their office.
On that note, let's just take stock of everything and prepare to march forward into this episode.
Our 4 Ps. Number 1, person. The aim of life is self-development, to realise one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. Oscar Wilde.
For the person segment today, I want to share a little snippet from a book by Tyson Yunkaporta, and it's called Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. David, you put me onto this book. In fact, I think you've even spoken to Tyson once or twice, haven't you?
Yep, we interviewed him at the Sustainable Prosperity Conference about his book, and he's just one of the most amazing minds going in 100 directions at once at light speed.
And I love this book. He's an Aboriginal philosopher. I think that's how we would dub him.
Yeah, he might sort of go, oh, shucks, it's all knowledge I've inherited. But he's done a beautiful job of putting the pieces together and making them comprehensible for us. So I would call him a philosopher as a compliment, even if he's perhaps a little shy about the title.
Well, we were listening to the audiobook, myself and my 2 daughters, as we were driving back from a holiday in the Riverland. And when this particular segment came up, we all leaned forward to have a listen, because it involves the story of the emu, and a particular thing about it that I instantly thought applies to all of us in small business or any form of organisation. Let's have a listen.
There are a lot of stories that explain how all this began. And as a Brolga boy, traditional enemy of emu, I know them all. My favourite one comes from Noongar elder Noel Nannup in Perth, who tells the dreaming story of a meeting in which all the species sat down for a yarn to decide which one would be the custodial species for all creation. Emu made a hell of a mess, running round, showing off his speed, claiming his superiority, demanding to be boss, and shouting over everybody. You can see the dark shape of emu in the Milky Way. Kangaroo, his head the Southern Cross, is holding him down. Echidna is grasping him from behind, and the great serpent is coiled around his legs. Containing the excesses of malignant narcissists is a team effort, a combination of social fragmentation and lightning-fast communication today, however, means we have to deal with these crazy people alone, as individuals butting heads with narcissists in a lawless void.
I've got to say, David, I think from time to time there can be a little bit of emu in us all. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I was smiling to the point here where I could barely talk, thinking that part of constant sort of self-monitoring in an attempt to keep learning and growing is going, there's always a bit of narcissism or a bit of ego that wants to come out and play, and every now and then it's very useful. But learning to stop it coming out too often is very important.
Yeah, and the whole thing, now that I've had this, Tyson's put this image due to the stories that he's shared of the emu being tall, that proud, the big pecker up there, strutting around. It is a sort of that number one A-type character that you do see in some workplaces. And the reason I wanted to share it here is I think little reminders of this from time to time can just help us keep in check if in our business, with our staff or in our families or with customers or going out to talk even, we embody too much of the emu in this particular telling and isolate people. Because one of the things that we learn from the literature around inclusivity and having diversity in any particular workplace or board or group is, you get some rough edges and some different points of view that you don't normally expect, but that's where the beauty comes. That's where you might uncover something of value that otherwise would be glossed past to everybody's loss.
Yeah, it really reminds me of Rutger Bregman's book, Humankind, where it really doesn't matter what group he looks at in the book. Most groups, given the opportunity, come up with a conclusion where everyone wins and everyone feels included and everyone likes being in there because they're open to listening and moving past friction. Whereas it seems if we get too many alphas making too much noise for too long, it ends up being the alphas versus the world, which is often alpha's default setting.
And look, when I think about myself, it could be an illusion, but I don't feel like I have that alpha to the max. You might tell me differently. I don't think I do, but I have. It can sneak in, and going to public talking is an example where you kind of muster that, not alphaness, but that confidence to be out there and strut on stage. But it was the talks I've done since hearing this passage from the book, I've gone into my talks with a completely different mindset, one of humility and really wanting to serve and wanting everyone to come out enriched, not judging its success by whether or not I was popular or funny. And I actually think it's made my presentations better.
It's a very good thing to get your head around. Of all the years I was lecturing, you have to go in there as an expert, but being an expert doesn't give you any right to be arrogant. And you realise as time goes on that the people who can do public speaking and sound like an expert, but also sound like they're opening to listening and learning, they're the people that audiences want to talk to at the end of a talk. The ones who get on stage and are an expert but are arrogant about it, everyone by then goes, well, okay, I guess I've learnt what I want to learn or can learn. Don't want to talk to them now. And people tend not to stick around and want to talk after. So you really can normally detect the difference between people who are willing to be experts and humble and people who demand to be recognised as experts and also feel the need to be arrogant.
Yeah, awareness of our intention is key, because everyone else can pretty much discern our intention anyway. So I thought I'd just share that for the opening segment, where we look at the person of the business owner or the leader. And I'll finish this with a little quote, because what Tyson does is use a lot of symbols through his book. And the symbol he chose for the emu, I think, is quite telling and a great reminder. It's the greater than symbol. And there's a lovely quote. He says, emu's problems can be seen in the mathematical greater than, less than interpretation of the symbol. Emu's a troublemaker who brings into being the most destructive idea in existence. I am greater than you. You are less than me. This is the source of all human misery. And I think it's also the source for suboptimal productivity, really. Who can thrive in an environment like that? So hopefully this little piece is something we can all peck at as we move forward.
are 4 P's. Number 2, principles. You can never be overdressed or overeducated. Oscar Wilde.
We're into the segment proper now, David. It's kind of going to plan. Does this undermine your planning fallacy promise?
No.
Or claim?
Not at all, because we're sitting in our office doing what we're experts at, which ups the chances of the plan going reasonably well, and seeing we like working collaboratively and testing things on each other. Even if a podcast went a bit wrong, that's okay, because we've already iterated it from absolute catastrophe into, well, maybe we adjust it. But working collaboratively with iteration, that's a great planning tool for going, our plan is always going to evolve, and that's natural and nice.
One of the things, because you and I have been putting together a planning day at the time of recording for an organisation to help them go through the planning process and strengthen up their planning abilities. And there's a lovely snippet of Kevin MacLeod that I'd just like to play now, because it really, I think, sets up the key principle that we want to talk on in this bit called principles.
It's not about the outcomes, it's not about the taste, because our tastes are all, they all vary. My taste is not the same as yours, or indeed mine 5 years ago. So, no, what matters to me is people doing it well. Yeah. And if you do it with the right people in the right way, the right processes, you really, use design properly, then you can get fantastic results.
So where do people go wrong? Do they dream too big then? Or?
I think many people, it's not just, perhaps not dreaming big, but building big. Do you know what I mean? And people often do this. They build really big homes and then discover they've got no storage and that the space they've got is just empty volume. It's not, just more space to heat it. Well, in a way, I suppose it's about turning the dream into the reality, isn't it? It's all the technical processes and it's all the products, it's all the kind of the craftsmen, the people, the journey to get there. And the programme is about that. The last 15 minutes is the finished building, but the rest of it is the business of actually gluing it together. And I'm very aware that, nowadays you can buy anything on the internet. You can buy a whole house. You can buy any one of 4.5 million separate tiles, or, there are 5,000 rugs to choose from if you can be bothered to look through them all. The point is that making the decisions is really hard.
Well, lovely to hear Kevin MacLeod's voice again. And I don't know how many of you out there in listener land are great fans of Grand Designs. Hopefully a lot of you. And what, of course, you've all seen on Grand Designs episode after episode after episode is people who are experts at something, but not building or renovating houses, deciding that they're now going to build or renovate an amazing house. And every time Kevin begins the episode with going and chatting to them and goes, that's very ambitious. Have you got enough time? Have you got enough money? Do you have the expertise? Do you perhaps need an extra architect or site manager? And they go, no. We're experts at something and we'll do this just as well. And part of the fun of Grand Designs is the planning fallacy happens in all but one episode of the show. And the only episode it doesn't happen in is with a British Army or Royal Marine veteran, I can't remember which now, who his legs are destroyed in Afghanistan. And the episode is about him building the house he needs to start his life post-recovery. And he can't get it wrong, and he knows things go wrong, so he refuses to do the episode without a building manager. And even though they have limits with money and time, they still get a house built that fulfills all his needs for accessibility and all the things he wants for his new young family. And working together went so well for the young ex-military officer and the building manager that they started their own company after the episode. So they were the opposite of what Grand Designs is about, and shows how amazing planning where you accept you're out of your expertise, you need expertise, time will be a problem, resources will be a problem, cash will be a problem, and you can't predict everything. They did such a beautiful job of acknowledging it that they realised they loved working together.
In the case of people listening who are running a small business, or they're a leader in an organisation who, many people I've encountered, tend to shy away from planning, at least planning anything beyond just, the next week or month. And I wonder if there is a subliminal understanding that I'm out of my depth, or what's the point of planning where everything changes anyway? And I remember encountering some research that was suggesting that even having a plan that is suboptimal to begin with is better than nothing. Because, in fact, I think it was Nigel Dobson, a cognitive scientist I know, who was making this argument, because the brain does a whole lot of its processing at nighttime in a parallel mode, so it can go through lots of different combinations and permutations instead of slowly doing serial processing through the day. And so even having something for it to act against gives it a chance to do some pattern matching, do some what-if scenarios, and come up with something that can be workable, as opposed to drifting.
Yeah, and this is a massive problem people have, that we get to being adults with everyone else more or less planning our lives and days. Then we go on to vocational or tertiary education, and again, people plan our days. And we're magically meant to learn from experience how to plan. There's not many professions in the world that actually train people to plan from first step to end of project. And even in those plans, or those professions with that kind of planning, more often than not, they end up with too much of a fixation on the plan, going, well, so much work's gone in, it has to be right. So the psychological advantage is in having a plan, but also being able to say it's iteration number one, and with additional data, we'll revise our hypothesis and our plan. So essentially, everyone out there's got their mobile phone and their laptop. Everyone out there uses Google or Bing. They are essentially running on a thing called Bayes' theorem. And Bayes' theorem says every time you get more data, you have to reassess your hypothesis and work out, does your hypothesis still stand? Or with new data, do you need a new plan and a new hypothesis? And the best form of planning is to see the world through sort of a Bayesian lens of going, well, it was a good start, now we've got more information. Let's do a quick revision. And that is not to say that you're at the whim of the universe, because you're not. You still know what endpoint you want. You still know what you want to achieve. But planning is much easier to deal with if we can all calm down and go, it's outside our normal experience, it's outside our initial expertise, and it's completely okay to see it as iterative as long as we keep our ends in mind and our resource limitations.
That's easier if you've got a smaller plan that is manageable, a one-page plan almost.
Yep.
You could easily make those changes. It takes a bit more if you've got a complex multi-chapter plan, though.
This is where something like the idea of SMART goals becomes very important, because even if you can get it down to the goals you want to achieve and the order in which you want to achieve them, they're your big bits. But under that, you can have a plan to achieve each goal. So the big thing is to never see it as just one plan, but to see it as, okay, we've got some goals we want to achieve. Each one of those goals is going to require its own strategies and tactics to get there. And they are going to change depending on how all the things that feed in go. Like if the first goal goes well, we've got a bit more time up our sleeve. Maybe we used less resources than we expected. So being able to chunk things, to realize where this is a good point to consolidate and to then reassess and go on to the next iteration. Big plans look spectacular and amazing, but more often than not, if people try and stick to the first big plan, there's problems because you can't keep all the variables in play. Instead, what you need is quality gates and waypoints where you go, we're doing well, or we need to reassess, or we need to reallocate resources, and go, we're still moving and we're still in control and we're still adapting. And that means we're going to succeed, just not necessarily the way we would have thought on the first day of planning.
So the key thing here, I guess, to bring this segment to some sort of usable outcome is having some sort of planning in place is great. And I'll put a link to a Smart Goals blog that we've got that's proving to be very popular. And the second thing is to understand that it's okay to revise, in fact, almost important to hold our plans loosely so that they guide us while we're active, and as new information comes in, it's okay and in fact good and proper to refresh them, shift them, make them respond to what we've learned that's new.
Exactly. The easiest way to think of this is it's the opposite of all your years at school where you were meant to get it right first try.
And just at a practical level, if you think through all the things that we've putting into this planning day, is there a do-it-yourself exercise that our listener could go away with and just start getting their brain lined up? Because we're going to come back and revisit planning in future episodes from different angles of it. What would you think is a first little do-it-yourself, dip your toe in the water exercise?
The best single tool to make you feel safer and braver about planning is a tool Gary Klein created called the pre-mortem. So a post-mortem is someone's died and we want to know why. Gary Klein's idea of a pre-mortem is your plan has failed. No negotiation, doesn't matter, we haven't even started implementing it yet. Your plan has failed. Now look at your plan and tell me why each step of your plan, why could it fail? Why has it failed? So you can automatically have something up your sleeve if it starts going wrong. That single thing will get you over having to be perfect, get you to start seeing that adaptation is normal, and get you to start seeing that we need to be able to adapt in real time as circumstances change.
Wow. There's a start, a pre-mortem. Do you have a wake after you've done that?
A lot of people need one because they're the one that always thinks their plan should be fine because they're an expert who drives everyone else in the room mad. And they really often struggle very badly to understand, no, my plan's not going to fail, it's my plan. And Gary Klein has said he often had to get quite angry with clients initially when he did this with them and go, your plan has failed because I say so. And that's all there is to it. So for the person who doesn't think they can ever fail, a wake is probably very relevant, and everyone else will probably want a drink.
Cheers.
Our 4 Ps. Number 3, problems. I asked the question for the best reason possible. Simple curiosity. Oscar Wilde.
David, I got an email only a few days ago at the time of recording from a bloke up in Darwin. Not a random person. This is John from Dunwright's Air and Electrical. Worked with him for a long time. And the email he sent me is very similar to emails I get. And it was this. Hi, Steve. I've just looked for the login for the website, unable to find it. With all websites, you have got the option on the login screen to click forgot or lost my password, and there's some sort of reset process you can go through. But the reason I wanted to share that email with John's permission is that I really am trying to get everybody in my world to use some sort of password keeper. And by a password keeper, I'm talking about a bit of software which you open up, that you pay for typically, and you have one magnificently tricky password that you will commit to remembering. But then when you're in this software, every sort of website you go to, you can create crazy passwords and username combinations. It does the job of remembering that detail. You don't need to. Your job is to remember the key to your password safe, and whenever you're online with the password safe active, whether that's on your phone or a computer, you go, it prompts you to log into a site, and you will have it able to be filled in from your password safe, whatever you use. I use one called Dashlane, but there are many others out there. And this is, I think, increasingly important because it is a vicious world out there with all sorts of scams to steal our passwords from. And one of the things that makes it easy is people using the same password on site after site after site. And I know that on the dark web, when there's a hack and the baddies get hold of a list of people's usernames, and which are typically email addresses, and passwords, they then shop across and compare across other lists they've bought and find if you've got memberships elsewhere, and they know there's a very good chance you've reused the password. It is the moment of truth now. We cannot any longer go on in the way we used to in the naive days. So just from a due diligence perspective, that means someone you share a login with to your website, if they have admin access and they don't have a secure way of holding their passwords, there's the weak link. You might be doing the right thing, so we need to embody this across all organisations. You with me, David? I hope you are.
I couldn't agree more. Even before this technology was available, one of the first things I did when screen reading software came along and I finally got accessibility to computers in 1997 is start a Word document with a ridiculous password in which all my username and passwords for everything for the next 15 years went, where I would make sure no two usernames and passwords were the same manually before this kind of technology became available. So even in the manual world, I was the weirdo who remembered the one big password to get into my document that was doing for all those years what these software packages do now.
Yeah, and one of the things that I heard on a recent podcast, I might play a snippet at a future episode when we come back to this, was that an interview with a hacker, and he was saying that where people have used the same username over and over again as well, that just makes it one step easier.
Yep.
So even changing up our usernames when we can, not just our passwords, just makes it a little bit harder for those, hideous scourges of humanity to get in and undermine our businesses, which they could do, or our personal accounts or reputations, if we don't make it that extra step harder. So thanks to John, he's triggered me to go on the warpath again about making it a very important job this week to go researching. So Dashlane I pay for an annual account, and it's active across all of my devices, and I can sleep well at night.
Our 4 Ps. Number 4, perspicacity. The one duty we owe to history is to rewrite it. Oscar Wilde.
In trying to be perspicacious to bring us home, David, trying to sharpen our thinking, we're going back into the vault to think about a business or a campaign or a movement from the past and see how it stands up in the light of day, in this case 2022. And you reached your hand into the big
jar
basket
of fun.
We've got, yes, and you've pulled out IBM. Why on earth have you done that?
Because I think their transition is very interesting. They started off as a company who made amazing hardware and recognized that making these big, huge mainframes was becoming less and less relevant to more and more people, that the majority of people were going to buy a PC and have it on their desk. And despite having an incredibly hierarchical culture and all IBM employees pretty much looking the same, short hair, very crisp white shirt, shiny shoes, they managed to transition from making big, complicated hardware and being a world leader to recognizing that all that actually mattered was solving customers' problems. And if they couldn't do that, it didn't matter what their hardware was. So I just think that is such an interesting transition for a company to acknowledge that the market they've dominated has changed so dramatically, but if they adapt in the right way, they will forever be at pace with the change in what their consumers need and where the market's going.
And they even amplified that in some of their advertising. I've got an ad here which I want to play about Bill, the CEO.
We're back. Our CEO of the week is Bill Jeff Way, and as usual, we're going to ask him some tough questions.
It's Bill.
Doesn't look nervous. Do you think he's wearing makeup? I think he's wearing makeup.
Bill, you're profitable, and that's big these days, but your whole business is going wireless. Can you retool to keep up?
Well, Bob, we have an 18-month infrastructure plan.
Infrastructure? 18 months. My guess, you've got 6 months tops, according to the street. Can you do it?
Well, we're evaluating several options.
Options? What options? He's making this stuff up.
Can you say right here, right now, that you'll be wireless ready in 6 months?
Uh-oh.
Don't do it, Bill. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Come on, Bill. Think. Remain calm.
Well, if we need to do that, we can do that.
There you go. And the street's going to hold you to that, Bill. We'll be back right after this.
And that's when it hits you. You are so ready for IBM.
I think it went well.
Wow. There's the captain of the ship on the TV, and you're thinking to yourself, I need to know where my life jacket is.
Yeah, and that's what still baffles me about IBM after all these years. How did they pivot when it was quite clear that, at least at very senior executive level, they were too busy running the company as if it was and not recognizing the transition that was coming? So it's still unclear to me precisely at what point there was a penny drop and a pucker moment and a change in direction that meaningfully turned the ship around. Now, they got to an amazing place. So the lesson we can really draw from this is how they transitioned is less important than they did. And we can learn from a transition that says, don't be fixated on repeating yesterday. Don't make assumptions about tomorrow. In the case of small business and medium business and whatever size business we're talking about, the most important thing is consistently, what are your customers telling you they need and want? And what is happening on the horizon that is going to disrupt your business? You may not need to do something about everything, but you do need to be aware of what consumers want and how that's going to disrupt what you've already done and what's happening in front of you that's going to disrupt both your customers and you.
Yeah, so we can't be asleep at the wheel.
Well, you can.
No, that's
you always have that choice. But the problem of that choice is, at very best, the car stops and you don't die. At very worst, the car stops and you die.
Yes, because one of the things they were trapped in for a bit was, I saw a couple of ads as I was going through the history of someone walking into a boardroom meeting and he opens his little ThinkPad, and as he opens it, there's this fold-out keyboard that's sort of cut diagonally so that it can be in a smaller space when it's stowed and then locked together, and you go, oh my God, that's going to not last long before dust gets in there. But it was more of just Henry Ford's thing about people wanting faster horses as opposed to taking a deeper look at the field you're in.
Yeah, like it's so easy to think that you can be incremental, but that's an internal discussion about how can we improve what we do from the terms of, we understand it as the people who make it. Whereas it's always at least as important, probably more, to go, how are people going to use it? And what else might they use instead of our product? Those two questions are far more immediately important.
Something to think about?
Without your ThinkPad.
Yes. David Olney, thank you.
Thank you, Steve Davis.
Yes, and if you'd like to send us a note, a comment, links to something, podcast at talkedaboutmarketing.com. Gets to both of us.
Thank you for listening to Talking About Marketing. If you enjoyed it, please leave a rating or a review in your favourite podcast app. And if you found it helpful, please share it with others. Steve and David always welcome your comments and questions, so send them to podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com. And finally, the last word to Oscar Wilde. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.